Hello and welcome to 100% Real with Ruby. Today I have finally, long awaiting, Alan Aragon on the podcast, and he is the master guru of literally everything nutrition. And I remember way back when in 2016 and 2017, I was just binging his content and Lyle McDonald before someone bloody blocked me. But but Alan Aragon and Elaine Norton have been like the top of the chain for everything nutrition. And with Alan, he just puts it to you straight in a way that isn't a way to sell something to you. Like it's not convoluted in, hey, this is my reverse dieting protocol. Hey, this is some keto carnivore accelerate your actually stop your aging kind of thing. So with all that being said, Alan, welcome to the podcast. I want to start this off with you talking about, I guess, your post on this kind of summarizes everything that you do, everything that you try to do for like this whole industry. And that's thinking that you need to lose weight is the actual problem in itself. The solution lies in gaining new habits and remodeling your daily routine with actual strategies to go against your old habits. And your flexible dieting book pretty much is the epitome of that. So I'll let you take it off with that.
Cool. Thank you so much, Ruby, for having me on the podcast, first of all. And it's always really cool to finally talk to somebody and meet them after having known them for many years online. So this is a really cool thing for me as well. So thank you. Um, as far as the whole concept of thinking you need to lose weight is the problem, it's this attachment to the idea that if you're lighter on the scale, then everything will be better in your life. That's one aspect of it. And then the next aspect of it is thinking that achieving that number on the scale really means a damn thing if it's not something that you can maintain for a lifetime. So anybody can lose weight, anybody can lose fat, but developing the infrastructure, the psychological framework, the habits, and everything surrounding that in order to maintain this newly transformed body, that's a whole other ball game. And so people tend to think 12 weeks down the line, by the time summer hits or whatever it is, by the time this reunion hits or this this photo shoot or this contest or whatever it is, that's as far as they can see. They don't think much further beyond that. And I think it's really important to think in terms of a lifetime versus just summertime. And so there's different avenues to go in with those concepts.
And this is kind of the hierarchy of your transformation pyramid in that it's not really the training or the nutrition at the base of it. It's your behaviors, it's your lifestyle, it's the super glue that kind of puts it all together to make sure that what you can do remains long term. But inside of those nutritional habits, which obviously are a lot more important than the training itself when it comes to fat loss, there are some basic principles to follow. And you outline this in one of your research reviews as well. And I guess there's also the point that you put out, hey, drink water with your meals. And for a while there were people saying, no, don't do that. That does stuff for your gut and all this other bull crap out there. So I guess what is the best framework for someone who actually is wanting to lose fat and not be another one of those people that keep regaining it back?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest steps is to note that you're chasing a fundamental change in body composition. So everybody's got this number in their mind that the scale will give them that they think is going to be it. That's the goal. That's it. I think people need to detach from that and focus more on what's going on with clothing fit, what they're seeing in the mirror, and even things like training performance. And so the scale can be useful, but it has to be a part of other indicators of improvements in fitness, health, body composition. And so I think that number one, people shouldn't see the scale as this end all be all indicator in the effort to lose body fat. And that's because the fitter you get, the leaner you get, the less useful the scale actually is. And there's many examples that I've observed in the field with clients and with competitors, with regular people, that they actually can be the same weight, and in some cases even weigh more, but have better body composition at the end of the rainbow. Um, and so that's one of the big things that I want to emphasize is that scale weight can only tell you so much. Scale weight is useful for people with obesity or people who are significantly overweight, and it'll be a more accurate indicator of progress. But once you start getting into normal body weight ranges, and if you're progressively resistance training, and if you're adding muscle tissue, then that's going to offset the accuracy of what the scale is telling you with regard to fat loss. Um, and so the next bit having to do with habit changes, a lot of it is just perception and the accurate knowledge of foods and nutrients and how they affect the body. So um, in terms of being able to maintain a set of habits, to maintain a particular diet, in order to keep that going for, let's say, years or decades, nobody can do that with a set of foods that they don't like. I don't care if you can put anybody in a study in a lab setting and force them to follow a diet for 4 to 12 weeks. Who knows, even 6 months, but in real life, we do this stuff for years and decades. And so the only way you can succeed in the true long term is if you honor your personal preferences with food. So if you notice, if you do a survey of 10 people, ask them, hey, what are your 20 favorite foods? You'll get 10 different sets of 20 favorite foods, 10 drastically different sets. Well, that's just the principle of individual response, individual preference, and people are drawn to the foods they like for very good reason. And the reasons can be physiological or psychological or a combination of both. But the thing is, you have to honor those preferences. And the whole idea that there's this narrow set of foods and there's this single particular way to set up macronutrition to succeed is bunk. And we need to get off of that, because the better you can individualize programs, the better you can align program variables with individual preferences, tolerances, and goals, then the better you can help those habits be maintained for the long term.
I guess this is re-emphasizing the point that going to Facebook forums for advice is probably the worst thing you can do, because you'll get answers, but you'll get about 100 opposing answers. You'll get someone saying, oh, just do a water fast, it's good for you. Oh, try intermittent fasting. Oh, you just need a calorie deficit. And that's in itself the stupidest advice, because it's just like, yeah, cool, but how? And then you get someone saying, oh, you need to cut out your carbs. You only need to eat good carbs, cut out anything that's white carbs. Like, it's a conglomerate of just bullshit that only confuses you more. And the worst part of it is you'll start on something. 3 weeks later, you wonder why you don't have results, and then you jump to the next thing. So you never actually did one thing long enough. But then as soon as you put what you're doing on there, people will tell you why it's wrong and why their way is the best way. But I want to go back to the scale point, because I think that's a very important part, especially because most people listening to this are females and they attach their worth, their identity to a scale. I guess we got brought up with the scale number, with seeing, oh, this person weighs this much on the magazine, and just the culture of weighing ourselves. But if I remember, before I fell into my eating disorder, I was 55 kilos. And obviously, I had a lot more body fat then. A lot more. I didn't train. Obviously, I didn't train. I was in high school. And I got down to 37 kilos. So I lost that's over 10 kilos lost. That's like 18 kilos. But now if you look at me, I'm 58 kilos, which is completely different from my 55, but with a complete different body composition change. And then if you look at me at the start of my whole actual fitness journey, once I got up to a healthy weight, I was about 50, 52 kilos, and now I'm 58 kilos, and I don't look like I'm obese or fat. I'm literally just more muscle, and I went through phases of building and cutting. And this kind of leads into the point that everything is periodized. And if you don't periodize your approach, that can still keep you stuck in that same loop that will have you questioning everything, because why isn't this method working anymore? Because it works until it doesn't. So maybe you can speak on that as well.
Yeah, yeah. Everything in nature is cyclical, basically. I mean, the body's rhythms are cyclical, from the circadian to the monthly, and who knows, even annually, just with the seasons of nature. So trying to keep a linear grind for an indefinite period of time almost always fails. So and this applies to nutrition to a certain degree, and it certainly applies to training. Like, you can't go hard 100% of the time. You got to blast sometimes, and you got to cruise sometimes. To relay the words of Dante Trudel when he's talking about cycles. With diet, for example, especially in the case of women, if we talk about things like diet breaks, so being in a caloric deficit or imposing that caloric deficit, what is an ideal time period to be on it, and when should you pull back and go on a diet break where you're eating unrestrictedly, not like YOLO style unrestricted, but just kind of back to maintenance levels where you're not following all the rules of your diet. So diet break for a week. That should occur, in my observations, once every 4 to 8 weeks, depending on how the individual is feeling, depending on the degree of psychological fatigue of the dieting process. And a model that I've been seeing work pretty dang well is to sort of go hard for 3 weeks, and well, when I say go hard, be in a caloric deficit for 3 weeks, and then lighten it up and take a break every fourth week, and time that fourth week at the time of the month where your cravings and your appetite is highest. So you're kind of working with your natural cycles rather than against it. And usually that time of the month where the cravings are highest are usually around and near the menstrual cycle. So you'll be deficit 3 weeks, diet break 1 week, and then you start the process over again. And it doesn't seem like this linear grind that you have to diet for 6 months straight and kill yourself for 6 months before you get to the goal.
This is why knowing your body is so important as well, because some people, like, their menstrual cycle doesn't phase them, so you can just keep going through. But others, if you're just wanting results yesterday and you try to push through something where your body's fighting back, you're only putting yourself into a bigger weight loss purgatory, because you're mentally putting in so much effort for very little physical reward. And this is also where the whole weight loss resistance comes in. It's not really weight loss resistance, it's diet fatigue that isn't just physical, it's mental. Dieting is mentally fatiguing. So, of course, you're going to have quote unquote weight loss resistance, because when you're mentally fatigued, your body is going to reflect that. You're going to slow down in general, which makes it harder. And your hormones are a reflection of your lifestyle, and they're also a reflection of the way your body responds to what you're doing to it. So there was something else you said that I liked. And again, going back to the flexible dieting, most people don't even know what they want, because when you try to frame something around what are their preferences, they answer with what they think their answer should be, because because they want a particular result. It's almost like, okay, so what foods do you like? Oh, I like chicken, I like broccoli, and you list all the quote unquote clean foods that you like, because you don't want to list the other ones, because why would that be food that can be included? So maybe you can touch on that a little bit more, but how you can take IIFYM too far and hinder your overall results?
Yeah, the first part about honesty with people's reporting is always going to be an issue. We're just sort of naturally wired, well, the general population anyway. Not, not the fitness folks like us, of course. General population, they very typically underreport the junk foods. And when I say the junk foods, the hyperpalatable refined carb and fat combo foods, the commercially highly engineered ultra processed stuff, they typically underreport that, and they overreport the, in quotes, the clean foods, especially the protein stuff, the lean proteins. They overreport that. And so given that, whenever you're assessing somebody's habits that they've turned into you, then it always helps to know that there's always going to be a certain degree of misreporting that goes on. And it also can help to know that in the obese population, the misreporting is actually greater. So there's some complex psychological things going on in that department that are sometimes difficult to navigate through and overcome. As far as taking the IIFYM thing too far, people have to realize that if it fits your macros the very, very beginning, when my buddies and I on the forums made that acronym up, we were answering questions having to do whether it's okay to have whole eggs versus egg whites, and other questions like whether it's okay to have dark meat versus white meat. We weren't answering questions about, hey, can I get all of my carbs from Pop-Tarts? That wasn't that wasn't the vibe. That wasn't the message. So IIFYM was more saying, hey, look, you like full fat dairy? Cool, have full fat dairy. Just be aware of how that full fat dairy impacts your macronutrient targets. Because if you're somebody on one hand is having, let's say they're having fat-free milk while the other person is having some sort of full-fat milk, then the full-fat milk is going to impact the amount of dietary fat that you've allotted for yourself for that day. It's not bad. It's not good. It just kind of is what it is. And if people are striving to achieve a certain intake by the end of the day or by the end of the week, then awareness of this stuff helps. So the IIFYM movement sort of ended up becoming a game or a sport to see who can show off their massive amounts of junk foods that still equal a sound breakdown of proteins, carbohydrates, and fats.
Those flex balls.
And yeah, it's flexible. I'm just eating candy for my carbs and, just having protein powder and hit my protein needs, and fat, who gives a crap about that? We got a low fat target anyway. Just take my fish oil pills or whatever, whatever it is. I mean, there was a lot of variations in the abuse of the IIFYM concept. And I want to reemphasize, me, Eric Stevens, Lane, we all kind of made that IIFYM thing up. And we just used that acronym because we got really tired of telling people on the message boards that, hey, look, you like peanut butter that much? Okay, cool. You can have it. Just be aware of how it fits your macronutrient targets for the day. And then you can even have peanut butter in your diet. You can even have whole eggs. You can even have skin on the chicken if you're aware of how it impacts your macronutrient targets.
I think that's also where a lot of people undo themselves, because they don't realize, especially if you're so hesitant to tracking, you don't realize how calorie dense chicken skin is. Like, it's mainly fat, and fat is the most calorie dense thing there is. And peanut butter as a teaspoon is not the same as a teaspoon in grams, yet people just spoon their peanut butter. But it's,
oh yeah,
you're not aware until you're aware of it. And
that's right.
This kind of leads into what do you have to say to the people who say they aren't losing weight, but they're in a calorie deficit?
Yeah. fact of the matter is, if you're not losing weight and you think you're in a caloric deficit, then aside from just temporary, transient, and very limited body water retention fluctuation, you're likely not in a caloric deficit. Because you can take anybody in the world and let's say lock them in a closet and have a little opening there for them for you to control. You control their what they eat. Every single last one of them is going to lose weight. Every single last one of them. Even if you feed them a really whack, crazy, almost all carbohydrate diet of let's say 6 slices of bread a day, they're going to drop weight like crazy. And so it's just, once again, people's perception of what they eat is often highly inaccurate. And this evokes the Lichtman and colleagues study, 1999 or 93. I always mix up those years, where they examined the just obese subjects who claimed to be diet resistant. And these subjects had a history of actually thyroid medication use as well. And the common claim amongst the subjects was an intake of about 1,200 calories a day, while maintaining an obese body weight. So when they put these folks in the lab and they measured everything they need to measure, energy in and energy out, they found out that they were underreporting caloric intake by about 47% and overreporting physical activity by about 51%. So in other words, there was about 1,300 calories that was going unreported by these folks, not on purpose, but just by their misperception of the variables at play. So that is a big deal. And that's something that people hate to hear. They want to hear that, okay, my metabolism is just dropped like a stone. That's why I can't lose weight no matter what. But the people in this study, the maximal amount of metabolic rate decrease, or the lowest that metabolic rate was below predicted values, was about 8 to 10%. So you're looking at a metabolic disadvantage of 150 to 200 calories or so, compared to somebody with an epic, awesome metabolism, right? So 200 calories is not insurmountable. It shouldn't be a make or break factor in any program.
Yeah, and this is where the metabolism is broken argument gets thrown around, where it's just like your metabolism doesn't slow down all that much. It's only an initial drop. The rest is you slowing down. And I guess this also, it kind of feeds into what we were talking about just before I clicked record. I got into like an argument about someone saying that it's not about being in a calorie deficit. You can lose weight outside of a calorie deficit because it's all about carb metabolism. But this is also where the argument comes in, where people want to go keto or cut their carbs, or they say sugar is addictive. But maybe you can clarify what exactly dictates carb metabolism and why carbs are not to blame and neither is sugar.
Yeah, carbs get a bad rap, and sugar as well, because of what they're associated with, what they're kind of entangled with, So there is an entanglement situation with carbohydrate and fat in ultra processed, highly hyperpalatable foods. And I'm talking about, cookies, cakes, desserts, packaged foods, packaged goods, chips, those kinds of things. And carbs get lumped in to this single monolithic unit, carbs, when in fact people have to realize that carbs, or carb-rich foods, are a highly diverse group of foods. You have everything from legumes, which are carb dominant, to fruit, to tubers like potatoes and yams. All of those things are still carb dominant, carb rich foods, but they have very different behavioral impacts and satiety impacts from, let's say, sugar sweetened beverages like the soda, Coke, Sprite, Then you got your Twinkies and ho-hos and ding dongs and donuts, right? So um, very different sources of carbohydrate. So when people talk about carbs as if there's some sort of single unit, right there they screwed up. So it's not about carbs, it's about food selection within a highly diverse range of foods. And so, and I'm not saying that there is no room in the diet for the naughty sources of carbs, but people really shouldn't lump them together when they talk about effects on appetite, effects on body fat gain, and the effects on satiety. So that's the beginning of people's confusion when they blaming carbs. You really need to take a closer look at what you're blaming. And a lot of people who blame carbs independently, they're just unaware of the research in this area, comparing diets that are isocaloric, so equated for total calories, and isonitrogenous, or equated in protein intake as well. So anytime you equate those two, it doesn't matter how different the carb proportion is within the diets, the fat loss will always come out the same at the end of the experiment.
I do believe the carb ones actually came out with a slight advantage as well, especially in adherence, didn't it?
You know, it can't, when you look at, immediately I'm thinking of the meta-analysis done by Guo and Hall, where they found a slight advantage in terms of energy expenditure as well as fat loss with the higher carb conditions in these tightly controlled feeding studies, where, you know, it's not a free living design where people, they're not watched, and they don't have enough surveillance, and there could be more variations in there that go on. But in these controlled inpatient feeding studies, where they're provided the diets and they're surveilled basically around the clock, yeah, the higher carb conditions, they do provide a slight advantage in net fat balance and in energy expenditure, but it's not a big enough advantage to be able to say in practical terms in the real world, hey, everybody should go high carb, low fat because of this slight advantage, because it's too small to have practical or real world significance. And I also want to add to that it's not totally surprising that the high carb, low fat conditions would have greater energy expenditure and greater fat balance, because dietary fat is easier to store as body fat. It's a lower thermic effect. Carbohydrate has a higher cost, metabolic cost of processing, hence the higher energy expenditure. And so I wasn't surprised to see that. But I tell you what, everybody who gets, I guess, radicalized or gets wooed into thinking that carb restriction is the way, low carb and keto is the only way, and they think that there's a research basis for this. There is, but it's only in studies where there's a substantially higher protein intake in the keto condition, which is typically what happens when you take a group and you tell them, okay, all you're allowed to eat is protein and fat. Avoid carbs, avoid foods with carbs. That's your assignment. Go. And then this other group, here's your low fat, high carb diet, stick to that, or stick to your habitual intake. So what happens almost invariably is the keto group ends up doubling its protein intake from baseline. And protein is the most satiating macronutrient. And so the ad libitum keto that ends up doubling the protein intake, or substantially increasing protein intake, is the one that results in the greater fat loss. But that is not seen when the study is actually properly designed to examine what it's supposed to examine, which is difference in carbohydrate intakes, not differences in protein intake.
That is what pisses me off literally the most about people claiming studies. They don't actually know what the studies involve, and they're just like, well, this said this. No, it didn't actually. And the thing I love most about that is that you emphasized that it was done in a controlled setting. And yeah, I was going to mention the thermic effect of carbs, but in a controlled setting. But if you put those people out into the real world, and if they were actually training, then you would expect carbs to have the slight advantage. Well, probably way more than a slight advantage, because now they're going to train harder. They're going to want to move more. And like that energy goes somewhere. In a controlled setting, you can't really do all that. So if you can, like, if you realize that that was in a controlled setting, and then you try to prophesize what could happen in like free world living where you can move and train and do awesome shit, then you would see a bigger advantage from the fact that you would have more energy and training capacity to do that stuff anyway. But something you said I absolutely loved, and people who tend to go really restrictive in one way tend to completely flip and go the other way, which is where the health at every size movement came from, which I'm sure you probably despise that as well. But it also goes into trying to fit everything into the diet. And then there's the thermic effect of whole foods. There's the ability for you to have optimal digestion, to feel good, to have energy. What you eat, your macros, your micronutrients, it dictates your mood. It dictates your energy. It dictates how you feel. And if you feel like shit because you're eating shit, your sleep would probably be shit. How would that be optimizing your fat loss process? And then you mentioned satiety as well, which is what people don't realize. Carbs are not, well, you can say carbs are the most satiating, but the thing is, what carbs? Because the lollies aren't the most satiating, but if you look at potato, without the butter, without the salt, now that's satisfying. And one last point, because I love Broderick Chavez and the way he said this. I remember him going, fat, it just gets stored on your ass. the way he said it, if you can imagine his voice, it was that's literally like, fat doesn't need to go through some complicated biological process to get turned to fat. It literally is already fat. Whereas sugar, carbs, it was so good. Sugar and carbs, like that's your fast cash, that's your fast money. That is what's getting used straight away first. And then whatever's excess gets stored. So
I want to add, Ruby, that there's a minority of the population who prefers keto and can stay on it forever. They love it. And to them, I say, great, more power to you. You know, knock yourself out, live your keto life and enjoy it. But the problem comes in when they start preaching that as something that everybody needs to do to optimize their lives. And that's just simply not true. So just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Live your keto life full of, that's the other thing. Like, people also don't realize that if they get predominantly most of their fat from saturated sources, then that's not really optimal for their health either.
Yeah, the interesting thing about the keto phenomenon is it's a great diet while it's helping people drop body fat. And it will do that for a time period. But once you're past that and all you're eating is just land animal fats and some protein, you have a suboptimal diet in terms of cardiovascular protection, in terms of long-term health potential, because there's a lot of opportunity cost that you're shouldering by not consuming fruits, vegetables, and just various food types in the plant kingdom that are well documented to lower disease risk. So it always kind of comes back to the omnivores who don't put these restrictions on their diet, who don't put these carb restrictions on their diet, who will eat potatoes and who who will have fruits and legumes and grains and all that stuff. And the evidence just, it is what it is, man. It is what it is. There will always be people who are restricting the hell out of their diets in both directions, whether it be the vegan direction or whether it be the keto carnivore direction. There will always be those folks. The human animal is extremely resilient. We can survive suboptimal diets for decades and decades. And a lot of us can be on a suboptimal diet, but quality of life comes into play. And just the reasons for people doing this are usually to maintain a certain acceptance in a social tribe. I mean, our drive to be accepted within social structures is strong enough a lot of times for us to take on diet as a religion. This is my diet religion. This is how I identify myself. Hi, my name is Alan Aragon. I'm a keto vegan.
Yeah, I made a statement the other day saying it, like, the politics of nutrition is worse than the monkeys in the parliament, quite literally. But
Tell them, don't hold back, Ruby. Just tell us how you really feel. You know,
they're monkeys. Everyone's a monkey. But speaking of quality of diet, I was reading a study the other day, because we know that the RDA, or protein, is absolutely bullshit. But the same goes with a lot of the other things that are out there, is just like basic guidelines. Like, yes, that's good for preventing so-and-so, like preventing whatever diseases it is. But if you want to actually optimize your health as well, there's like a high, well, not a high limit, but there is more to those guidelines than what meets the eye. Like, for example, veggies. I was reading a study where it's actually at 6 serves that your disease risk really starts to mitigate. It mitigates your disease risk more. And then at 10 serves, that's pretty much where it starts to plateau. So with that leading into, then there's fiber, there's micronutrients. And if you think about your metabolism and your thyroid hormones and everything inside of your body, they all need key enzymes, and those enzymes, protein, but there's also components that are like B vitamins, magnesium, and you don't just get that from a diet that doesn't actually include veggies, fruits, and a wide diverse thing. Mm-hmm. So using that, I want you to set up the ultimate diet for fat loss: zero fluff, for satiety, for sustainability, and obviously the fact that you don't live in a fat loss phase.
Okay, so if I were to just kind of spontaneously construct this diet, so here we go. Let's start off with total energy, total calories. It's got to be less calories than you burn in the course of a week. You know, daily fluctuations, whatever, fine. But by the end of the week, you want to be able to impose a caloric deficit that will allow you to drop 0.5% of your total body weight a week if you want to be safe about maintaining lean body mass. If you're on the heavier side, if you're overweight, obese, then 1% of your total body weight per week is a safe and realistic rate of loss. Okay, but as you get towards your goal, that's going to go down. So the way to impose that caloric deficit is easy enough. Take a look at your maintenance caloric intake and subtract 10% of that. And then you create a caloric deficit. And usually when that's married with a training program, then you can really kind of get things moving. If you subtract more than 20% from your maintenance caloric intake, then that can kind of wake up some of your body's defensiveness. But I can see that being justified in the obese population, where you can zap 25 to 30% of caloric intake and really kind of get that ball rolling. But 10 to 20% caloric deficit is the first part. Okay, so the second part would be to make sure your protein intake is adequate. So adequate protein for the dieting population really kind of begins at 1.6 grams per kilogram of body weight, which is 0.7 grams per pound for those of you in good old US of A. So, and that can be, you can take that as high as 2.2, even higher, but let's just to keep things simple, 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram of body weight. And when you're programming protein, it's best to, and it's safest to base it on your goal body weight, because you're really not trying to feed the total body weight if you're in a state of obesity. Okay.
But so, I will add, make sure that it's a realistic goal body weight and not something that you weighed in high school.
Yeah, your high school body weight, you will not have been at your peak bone density even in high school. So it's just not realistic in that case. So yeah, realistic target body weight is what you would base protein target on. So 1.6 to 2.2 grams per kilogram. So we got that 10 to 20% caloric deficit for maintenance. We got that protein target. And now the next thing you want to look at is individualizing your carb and fat intake to, drum roll, your personal preference and your goal. So if you don't have significant goals of building muscle, then I kind of don't care how low in carbs that you go. If you're somebody who loves low balling carbs, you love taking in like 30 to 50 grams a day of carbohydrate,
And
that's you. That's fine. Go do it.
no ice cream, no chocolate, no life,
Yeah.
no fun.
Right. You eat like 2 fruits and then there goes your carbs. Hey, man, if you love that lifestyle and you think that that's going to make you happy for life, fine. That's fine with me. Whatever. But if you're somebody who has goals of gaining muscle, and a lot of people who are carrying a bunch of body fat do have muscle gain goals, like to say they're in the skinny fat, phase of their lives. Uh, it's difficult to optimally gain muscle on ketogenic carbohydrate intakes. And this has been demonstrated in the literature more than once, where they're comparing a conventional high carb intake with a ketogenic intake in resistance training subjects. And the resistance training subjects, they simply do not either retain their lean body mass as well, or they don't gain as much lean body mass as the non-ketogenic conditions. So that's the caveat that I would throw in there. Now, if you don't give a crap about gaining muscle, you'll go as low as you want with carbohydrate. And that's kind of the long and the short of it. If you do have these goals of gaining muscle, I personally would not go below, I would want to say 2-3 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So I wouldn't dip below that, because then it's just really kind of inefficient to accommodate escalating doses of training volume when you're ketoing. And it's difficult to accommodate those escalating doses optimally. Now, I'm not saying that somebody who goes on keto cannot gain muscle, or it's impossible to gain muscle. No, you totally can gain muscle on 0 carb keto. It's just that the process is going to be inefficient, and it'll be an uphill climb compared to doing things efficiently and optimally. And okay, so we've got the structure of the diet, energy-wise and macronutrition-wise. So now we have to talk about, since we're talking about fat loss, we have to talk about food selection, because food selection impacts satiety. So with the protein group, it kind of doesn't really matter. They're all fairly equally satiating, but I would say that solid, chewable forms of protein are a little bit more satiating than just liquid forms of protein and protein powder all day. Okay, so if you're really having issues with satiety and you really want to maximize the amount that your diet staves off hunger, then you wouldn't necessarily want to do it like liquid diet style. I would rather, see somebody investigating their options with solid forms of protein if they're really having a hunger issue.
This is why fat loss diets with shakes are absolutely stupid.
Oh, that's classic. That's classic. I love it. I love it. And so you would have to keep an eye on that. And it's fine to have, a shake or two in the day, but somebody who's trying to lose body weight and body fat for the long term and maintain the lifestyle, it's typically is highly unlikely for people to be liquid dieting for the long term and think that's going to end well and work out in the long term. And so that's protein. With carbohydrate and fat, carbohydrate, in terms of food selection, it helps to know the food groups and how they're classified. So with carbohydrate, you have fruits and you have starches, and there's a certain amount of carbohydrate in the milk group, depending on what foods you choose there. But let's just talk about the starch group for a second. The starch group can be subdivided into legumes, which are beans and peas, pulses, those sort of things, and grains and grain products. So grains and grain products being cereal, rice, bread, corn, um, flour foods, and all of that stuff. And so the more satiating foods are going to be the less refined foods within the grain subgroup, and also the the legume group is going to be satiating. And some people have issues with eating a lot of beans, and it usually has to do with, you know, blowing their partner out of the room on a regular basis. That's not always the most fun thing to do unless you're trying to mark your territory on occasion, you know. But at the gym.
But
But
people coming into your sets.
right. So whole fresh fruit is satiating. Tubers and legumes are satiating. And the less refined aspects of the grain foods are satiating. So that's how you would want to choose your carbs if you want to go with that. Drinking down your carbs with sugar sweetened beverages and even fruit juices, not the greatest idea for dieters.
Oh, but aren't artificial sweeteners bad for you?
If you have orthorexia, then diet sodas are bad for you. You know, we just have to default to the evidence on that. So the weight of the evidence shows that diet sodas actually help with the weight loss process. But that's no surprise to folks like you and me who have a concept of how energy balance works. But there's a lot of folks who have bought into the fear mongering of diet sodas, and they'll point to literature showing ill effects on gut microbiome when you feed rats enough saccharin to, like, you know, implode a continent. But that's just not the case. If somebody were to have, you know, 1 to 2 diet sodas a day in place of either a full non-diet soda or a full-blown junk dessert or junk snack, they're much better off having the diet soda.
Yeah, and this kind of also feeds into the fact that if you're dousing your food with oil or with butter, if you think about the satiety of that compared to if you replaced those 300, 400 calories with something like more veggies, more pumpkin, more potato, you will be much better off in maintaining consistency on the diet, because you're not, like, hunger is one of the biggest things that derails people and cravings. And if you're hungry, your cravings will increase in themselves. And again, herbs, spices, there are so many ways that you can flavor your food that don't include adding extra fats to your diet. So there's that misconception that fat is super satiating.
Yeah, no, that is not reflected in the evidence. And in fact, you know, when we talk about food selection and satiety, your big weapons there are going to be high water foods and high fiber foods as well. And so you're looking at vegetables. Non-starchy vegetables are going to be a tremendous weapon in the satiety arsenal. So protein, water, and fiber as a trifecta for maintaining and increasing satiety is a underrated weapon in the dieting arsenal that a lot of people just aren't aware of. And so, yeah, if you can remember all those little tips, then you've got a basic framework for an ideal dieting scenario. And of course, you've got to marry that with the right training program, and that's a whole other thing.
That's a whole other podcast in itself. But
Yeah.
something else that Alan actually has on his list of magic things to do, and that's the way that you eat your food. Like, The same thing with water. Drinking water with your meals and before your meals is going to give you that sensation of a full stomach. So that's something else you can add in as well as chewing your food. But I want to talk about body fat and the fact that it's not just inert. It actually sends out signals, but also because I really wanted to talk about how like muscle synthesis, like building muscle, isn't as optimal when you have extra body fat. So I wanted you to talk more onto that.
Yes. So the phenomenon of in older adults called sarcopenic obesity has been investigated, and they're investigating the potential hindering effect that body fat may have on muscle growth. And so what they found in a limited data set is that inflammatory adipokines, so these molecular signals from adipose tissue, they conflict in some way with the muscle protein synthesis process. And so there is an association between inhibited muscle protein synthesis and the inflammatory adipokines released from an abundance of adipose tissue. And so that mechanistically might be underlying the condition of sarcopenic obesity. And it's one of the reasons why, when I wrote that paper on age-related anabolic resistance with Brad and with Kevin Tipton, and we recommended that in order to maximize the retention of muscle tissue as you get older, you also would want to keep your body fat levels under control. Inflammatory factors.
Oh yeah. Okay. So
Yep.
this also goes into the fact that as you age, your body doesn't absorb protein to the same degree as like your younger self. And this is also where resistance training can be seen as a lot more important. So maybe we can touch on that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. The muscle protein synthesis response in either old, disused, untrained, deconditioned muscle is not the same as the muscle protein synthesis response in young muscle or trained muscle. So you can take some old muscle, get it resistance trained, and resensitize it, and then you can rescue and preserve that young muscle protein synthesis response. So that's the whole idea. So the take-home message is it's never too late age-wise to start resistance training, start gaining strength, start reconstituting the muscular mass that you once had in college, let's say.
With protein, something that people aren't aware of is that the protein you eat isn't all straight like gone to muscle. There's only about, I think it's 10% of it that goes to muscle, and the rest is broken down for everyday use. And that most of the muscle that's used in protein synthesis is actually resynthesized. So maybe you can talk on that as well, and
Yeah.
what happens to the rest of the protein we eat and why is it so important?
Yeah, about 30-ish% and sometimes 50, as far as some estimates go, of the protein that you eat gets taken up by the gut tissues. And only a minority of the protein in a given dose is going to go towards incorporation into muscle tissue. It's going to go towards muscle protein synthesis. And that makes sense because otherwise, every time we eat a big serving of protein, we'll just incrementally just start kind of blowing up and become like Phil Heath after like a week. And so that's just not how the body works. Muscle gain is a painfully slow process. If you gain a kilogram or a half a kilogram of muscle a month, as a trained person, you are doing really damn good. And so the amounts on a daily basis are just minuscule. So But there are other fates of ingested protein aside from muscle protein synthesis, which is a tiny minority, 10%-ish. Like I said, there's like a 30-ish, possibly 50% where it gets taken up by the gut. And then the rest is split between being used for energy, just sort of burned off as heat, and used towards preserving health and homeostasis as far as the other cellular components of the body goes, including immunity. And so there's a variety of metabolic fates of dietary protein, and only a small amount of it goes into muscle protein synthesis. But let me just qualify all this stuff. That this doesn't mean that your body should only take that. This doesn't mean that you should only eat like a max of 20 to 30 grams of protein at a time. That's not what I'm saying. It's just that there is a ceiling of protein dosing in a single meal that will constitute and contribute to the anabolic response in muscle. If somebody were to eat, let's say, a pound of steak, and they are a kilogram of steak, right? They'll get about 100 grams of protein, if my math is okay on that. And they sit down and eat it all in one sitting. They'll absorb all of that. They'll digest and absorb all of that protein. But it will have a very different anabolic response than spacing the protein out through the course of the day. And I'm not saying that you've got to get your Tupperware and eat every 2.5 hours. But according to the evidence as it stands today, folks having their protein intakes in, let's say, 3 protein-rich meals or more, are going to have a greater net muscle protein synthetic response than those who are just slamming it all down in a single meal.
Yeah, and I know that you put it out there that 4 feedings tends to be the optimal feeding response for about 0.4 grams per kilo of body weight. So that's something to keep in mind. Like 4 meals is optimal, but obviously it's whatever reflects your lifestyle.
Yes, you did your homework. That's good.
You're like, reading your stuff was probably one of the first things I did when it came to protein. So there's that. And I guess there's the research that you put out as well on how it was within one of your research reviews on carbohydrate restriction and how that actually impacts the thyroid long term. So maybe you can talk on that a little just to rub some more salt in the wounds of the ketoers.
Yeah, the body has an interesting response to carbohydrate restriction. One of them is a decrease in thyroid output. And that decrease, it is hard to find consistent literature on it, but it averages to about maybe a 7% drop in resting metabolic rate with long-term carbohydrate restriction. Now, this isn't always consistent in studies, but if if people are experiencing negative consequences thyroid-wise, and thyroid activity actually does go down, so T3 levels actually do go down with carbohydrate restriction, severe carbohydrate restriction, keto levels and down. This could be a problem for people who already have pre-existing thyroid issues and don't necessarily, let's say, have their medication dose in line. Because along with hypothyroidism also comes the lack of vigor, energy, a higher level of lethargy that's accompanied by thyroid issues. And so when your RMR is down a little bit from the decrease in T3 levels, and you combine that with the lethargy inherent with hypothyroidism, and then you combine that with some of the lethargy inherent with avoiding carbohydrate, then you really do compromise energy out significantly in some cases.
Yeah, and I see this the case with females in particular because they're the ones that are usually running off their steam, and they're the ones more typical to trying to eat as little as possible, which only adds more issues to the thing. But I guess this kind of speaks to how it's not really insulin resistance or imbalanced hormones. It's the shit that you're doing to your body and the diets that you choose.
Yeah. Yeah. The human body is designed to withstand extreme diets, with carb avoidance being one of them, but things get sub-optimized in the process, and people have to shoulder that.
I guess one thing that I really want to summarize a lot of this with is one of the, well, I haven't seen it, and I know that most people are going to start seeing it, but what is the Kickstart guide to age your body more, which is stuff that people don't want to be doing?
Uh, if I can draw from my memory of that post that I did, it's a lack of sleep, a lack of resistance training, a lack of protein, and avoidance of fruits and vegetables, I think. Well, is there anything I'm missing there?
Stay sedentary, so also the whole walking thing. There's over consuming alcohol, and
Yeah. Okay.
and one of the important ones is predominantly eating ultra processed hyper palatable foods because they
Yeah.
have implications on your health.
Yep. That would be the recipe for accelerated aging. But the things that really stand out to me, Ruby, are this asinine lowballing of protein and this downplaying of the importance of resistance training. So you'll get those camps who say, "Oh, don't resistance train too hard, left ventricular hypertrophy and blah blah blah, and you gotta take it easy, and you gotta lowball your protein because of mTOR and IGF-1 and all this other nonsense that does not apply to aging humans." And I get real frustrated hearing that stuff.
So do I. But just because you're the protein guy, summarize that with why it actually irks you so much that people do
Yeah.
protein.
Yeah, the protein restriction thing was shown to work in yeast, flies, and worms. And the mechanisms of lower IGF-1, lower mTOR, that stuff applies fine to certain animal models. But the human animal is quite different in terms of the things that go on with the life cycle and the things that go on with the sedentary shift from young adulthood to older adulthood. And so you need to be putting money in the muscle bank starting from young adulthood. If you want to have a fighting chance when you're becoming an old fogey, when you're in your 50s, 60s, 70s, it helps quite a bit to have built that muscle bank and that bone reserve in order to stave off the inherent ravages of lean body mass loss associated with aging that's dictated by disuse and a sedentary shift. And the way to optimize these countermeasures is by making sure you optimize protein. I hate the idea of the caloric restriction mantra as well. Caloric restriction in aging only works as good as it can mitigate the effects of overweight and obesity. That's
How
it. That's the
about
only. That's it.
fasting and autophagy?
That's another ridiculous one. And then people will go, "Oh well, the guy who discovered autophagy, he won the Nobel Prize." Okay, well that's absolutely wonderful. I'm sure that the person who discovered insulin deserved a Nobel Prize as well. Doesn't mean we need to cut off all circuits of insulin within the body, right? Or maximize insulin output or whatever it might be. Autophagy is a default stress response. It's a catabolic process going on in the background. It's a physiological algorithm going on in the background, and it is something that takes a backseat to other elements programming wise that you would want to pursue. So just to give you an example here, autophagy happens from fasting. Yes, it does. But autophagy is, and okay, backing up a couple steps, autophagy literally means self-eating. And so it's the body being able to get rid of damaged cellular components. Okay, so autophagy gets ramped up with fasting, but it also gets ramped up in hypocaloric conditions, period. And another thing that people don't realize is autophagy in various tissues gets ramped up with exercise, and sometimes to a greater degree than it does with fasting. The problem with worshiping autophagy because of fasting is that this can be a double-edged sword. So it can either be a zero-sum game, or it can actually be a lose-lose. And the population in which it can be as a lose-lose scenario is people who are already lean, or people who are trying to fight off age-related frailty. So fasting works fabulously for people who have body weight and body fat to lose. Because you see all of these surrounding health markers improve, and you see a lot of positive health outcomes, hard health outcomes down the road when people, when the fasting is able to facilitate weight loss and fat loss. But once that's done, which can be done any number of ways, it doesn't have to be done intermittently with fasting, or it can be done with linear caloric restriction just as effectively. Once you're already lean, when you start messing around with fasting, you start courting, win-lose scenarios and lose-lose scenarios. And there is some recent research put out by Templeton who compared linear caloric restriction with alternate day fasting in lean subjects. The lean subjects actually lost more lean body mass on every other day fasting compared to daily caloric restriction, and neither group showed superior clinical blood markers of health. And so fasting is good for certain populations, but it gets to be a farce once you're already lean. The autophagy thing, once again, it's neither here nor there. If you wanted to chase autophagy, you should chase autophagy with exercise, because at least exercise doesn't rip lean body mass off of your bones, and you can experience a bunch of favorable physiological adaptations from exercise. Whereas with fasting, you might improve some things, but you might harm others. So
yeah,
exercise is the win-win. Exercise and autophagy, okay, win-win. Fasting and autophagy, win-lose depending on the population. But overall, who gives an actual crap about autophagy? Give a crap about optimizing longevity, cardiovascular health. Most people die of cardiovascular diseases. If you're focusing on autophagy, you're looking at the wrong damn thing.
I love the way you just ended that, because that's so true. And it summarizes everything. And this is why everything needs to be periodized. And I love how you said it. I don't know whether it was in a podcast or whether you said it in an article, but balance isn't a definition. It's contextual to the time, the place, the environment, and the phases in your transformation journey. And there's a balance of fat loss with a balance of, this is why muscle is so important for all the reasons that Alan just said. And this is why protein is so important for all the reasons that Alan just said. And you also have to realize that in a deficit, your muscle protein synthesis rates are dropped by quite a lot. So that's why you cannot just force one plane until oblivion, because that's when quote unquote resistance starts to come in. So with that, thank you for coming on. And I think out of everything that you've done, obviously this is a hard, like, hands down, flexible dieting book is one that most people need to kind of equip themselves with the knowledge that it's not about the insulin, it's not about the carbs, it's not about forcing yourself into peg holes that leave you kind of like a monkey in Parliament. So with that, is there anything that you want to end this with, and anything else that you want to plug?
I just want to say that I think you're doing an amazing job building your audience and getting the science-based, evidence-based approach out to the masses. And it's just really wonderful to see that. And just want to thank you so much for having me on, Ruby.
Thank you so much for coming on, and finally got you on. So I'm really happy that you guys got to listen to Alan talk on shit that you confuse yourselves with, that you do yourselves up in a knot with. And hopefully it ends the questions of, oh, but is this food bad? So with that, give this a share, give this a save, give this another re-listen, and take some notes, because it's not the sugar, it's your approach to your diet.